The Barguest prowls the British Isles. The name of this apparition differs depending on where you are on the island, but much of its description remains consistent. The Barguest is a large black dog that can have glowing eyes and huge claws. The Barguest is what people in the northern English county of Yorkshire call this creature, but people across the land will tell you that this isn't a dog you would want to lay eyes on. The Barguest is an omen of death. A Barguest-like hound has been seen near a stretch of road that connects the English towns of Sheffield and Manchester. Known as the Stocksbridge Bypass, the road runs around the outskirts of the small South Yorkshire town of Stocksbridge. The town was named after John Stocks, a local farmer and landowner who, in the early 1700s, built a footbridge over the Little Don River. This wooden bridge did not stand the test of time, unlike the legend of the Barguest who wanders the land. Do sightings of the Barguest have anything to do with the car crashes, which are sometimes fatal, that have occurred on the Stocksbridge Bypass? Within the first decade after the road opened, 14 people were killed and hundreds injured. Many of these wrecks have been linked to more logical explanations, but some survivors of these crashes will tell you that something supernatural caused these accidents. The Barguest isn't the only one haunting the Stocksbridge Bypass. Ghostly children have been seen dancing around pylons situated next to the bypass. It's said that they have been haunting this place for centuries after they died in the coal mines that existed in the area in the 18th and 19th centuries. But it isn't the children that some people blame for their car crashes. Something lurks on the bypass, something that has been described as evil. Forget the fairies that are said to dance in the moonlight in the nearby countryside. It's a robed figure that you need to watch out for. In the years since the bypass opened, many people have encountered this figure. Often described as a monk by those who have witnessed it, this spectre seems intent on giving road users an experience they'll never forget. In 2002, a woman was driving along the Stocksbridge Bypass when she began to smell a foul odour. To her, it smelled like a rotting body. With the smell lingering, the woman looked over her shoulder. Sitting in the back seat was a robed figure. Before disappearing into thin air, the figure glared at the driver with glowing eyes. Often, this monk-like figure suddenly appears in the middle of the road or leaps into the paths of oncoming cars. Paul and Jane Ford were unfortunate enough to meet this spirit. As they drove along the £14 million bypass, they came across a man in a long cloak who was trying to cross the road. But as the Fords got closer to the man, the situation became all the more unsettling. The cloaked man was hovering above the road, and he had no face. David and Judy Simpson had a similar experience. As their car drove along a bridge built over the bypass, Judy saw something strange out of the corner of her eye. She told the TV show Strange But True that what she saw was a, quote, grey apparition, end quote, and that it had no facial expressions. David also glimpsed this apparition, noting that it was hovering over the ground next to an embankment, moving its arms and legs in a running motion. That's when things got even more terrifying. The apparition suddenly charged up the embankment and into the road, only vanishing when it reached the side of the couple's car. To help calm their nerves, David and Judy stopped at a nearby pub. None of the locals were surprised at what the Simpsons had witnessed. Why is this ghostly monk so keen on haunting the Stocksbridge Bypass? Historians have dug deep into this area's past to find out more. History shows that monastery farms once existed in the area. Local historian Trevor Lodge told of a legend about a monk who lost his faith and spent the rest of his life working as a groundskeeper. When he died, he was buried in an unhallowed grave. Dr. David Clarke, a principal research fellow at Sheffield Hallam University, is a journalist who studies folklore and contemporary legends. Dr. Clarke tells of a slightly different story surrounding the monk. According to this legend, the man who haunts the bypass was once a Catholic priest. One day, he was trying to make his way to a secret mass being held at a cottage in the countryside when he got lost and succumbed to the elements. Whichever legend holds more truth is uncertain, but both stories agree on one important point: that the Stocksbridge Bypass was built over the monk's resting place. Tales of the ghostly monk predate the building of the bypass. Annie Staniforth was a local woman who lived at White Row Farm, close to where the future bypass would be constructed. Annie told her daughter that she had seen a monk on more than one occasion. But stories of this spirit took off when construction of the bypass began. When the building work started, Graham Brooke was training for a marathon. As dusk started to fall one day, Graham went out with his son, Nigel, for a run. As they ran past the construction site, Graham spotted a man walking in the middle of the road with his back to the traffic. Unsure of what he was seeing, Graham chose to keep this odd sighting to himself, until he realised that Nigel had seen the man too. Father and son noted that the man was wearing a dark brown hood with a cape covering his body. Along the front of the cape was a button every half-inch. He was carrying a bag that had a chain attached to it. Nigel heard the chain as it was dragged along the ground. A rotten smell hung in the air. Graham then realised that he could only see the man from the knee up. It was as though his lower legs and feet were in the road itself. Nigel stared at the man's face, or what little of it existed. The man had no facial features apart from a nose and eye sockets. As a lorry with its headlights on approached the figure, the man disappeared. It wasn't uncommon for construction workers staying on site to hear children singing and laughing in the dead of night. When construction began on the bypass in September 1987, security guards David Goldthorpe and Stephen Brooks, who isn't related to Graham Brooks, were assigned the night shift. Working in the dark hours wasn't anything new to the men, and having worked in the security industry for a long time, the men were prepared to make sure the building site stayed secure at night. Up until the night of the 8th of September, Stephen and David were not the type of people to be scared. As the security guards drove around the construction site that night, they became aware of a group of children running in a circle close by. It was midnight, and the site was far from any houses. There was no reason for the children to be out playing this late, and certainly not near a potentially dangerous place. As the men got ready to approach the children, they vanished. Perhaps it's possible that Stephen and David may have thought of a logical explanation for what they had seen had the strange occurrences ended there. But the monk was about to make an appearance. The next experience Stephen and David had happened either later that same night or a few nights later, but one thing is certain. It had a profound impact on both men. As they carried out their patrol of the site, the guards drove towards the newly built P-Royd Bridge. Everything would have been classed as normal. had it not been for the hooded figure that watched the men from the top of the bridge. Feeling brave, one guard got out of their vehicle and made his way towards the figure. The man that remained with the car shone the headlights at the figure. The lights shone straight through the figure and it soon vanished. After this experience, Stephen and David called their boss, asking him to come out to the construction site. Their boss was very much alarmed at the appearance of the guards. They were pale and physically shaking. Tears ran down the cheeks of one of the men. They told their boss exactly what they had seen, adding that the figure looked like a monk. Shaken to the core, the guards decided to speak to a police officer they knew. PC Dick Ellis realised that the men were clearly scared, but told them there was nothing he could do. To try and cheer the men up, Ellis told them that they needed the church more than the police. However, Stephen and David took the joker's advice, and Ellis soon received a phone call from his boss. Stephen and David were refusing to leave a local church and kept asking if the construction site could be exorcised. Eventually, both Stephen and David returned to their jobs, but not for long. Both of them refused to work on the Stocksbridge Bypass building site, even in the daylight. One of the men quit his job after a few days, with the other leaving a couple of months later. But the story doesn't end there. PC Ellis and his colleague, Special Constable John Beat, were instructed to patrol the construction site just a few days after Stephen and David had their experience. After arriving at the site late one night, Ellis and Beat sat in their police car. All was quiet as their radios, car engine and headlights had been turned off. Then, both men noticed something moving on top of Peroid Bridge. Ellis decided to investigate and climbed up a ladder onto the bridge. He found the culprit, a sheet of polythene. After Ellis returned to the vehicle, both men agreed to wait 10 more minutes before returning to their regular patrol route. But Ellis suddenly felt as though someone had walked over his grave, and he realised that someone was stood next to his right-hand side, pressing themselves against the car. Ellis glanced out of the car window and saw the upper section of someone's body. The person disappeared not long after Beat looked its way. Thinking that a prankster was on site, both officers checked underneath the car but found nothing. Deciding it was time to leave, they went to start the car engine, but unfortunately for Ellis and Beat, the engine wouldn't start. The officers then heard banging coming from the back of the vehicle, something that many people have reported as they drive along the road, along with the occasional sound of chains moving. After many attempts, the car started and the officers fled the construction site. Ellis made an official report about the incident. He told Strange But True that as officers, the fear they both experienced that night wasn't the kind of fear felt when someone is violent towards you. Ellis said it was dread coming from something you have no control over. There's no doubt that the Stocksbridge Bypass is a dangerous road, with many lives being claimed in the years since the bypass opened. Is there any historical evidence that explains the presence of the monk? Does the bar guest stalk the surrounding countryside? Or are there more logical explanations for the accidents and paranormal experiences that happen on the road? Whatever the answer may be, some might say that the Stocksbridge Bypass's unlucky history is all down to the date the road opened. The year was 1988. The month was May. It was Friday the 13th.